All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back to the Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens, and this is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. Tonight, we're going to read another sutta because it's what we do every Sunday night. Um, Tonight, we're we're still in the Majjhima Nikāya, but we're moving on to Sutta number 77 tonight, the Mahāsakuludāyi Sutra, the large or the Maha Sutra given to Udayan or Sakuludāyan, as he might be called in that way. Um, this is going to be another little sutta, another teaching that is to the Paribbājakas, the wanderers. We've been in this section now for a while, for a couple of weeks. And so Udayan is another of the Paribbājakas, another wanderer. Um, yeah, I guess we'll start just by talking about the title of the sutta really quickly. So, interestingly, if you jump over to sutta number 79, so two suttas from here, that one is the Chula Sakuludāyan Sutra. So the little teaching to the same person. And basically, this is going to be a situation where this is the Buddha's first conversation with this guy. And then he's going to have another conversation. And that's ultimately what converts him and his followers to Buddhism in that way. So we're going to read this one. And then I actually think we will jump right to the Chula one, although maybe not next week because this one might take us two sessions. We're going to see how that goes. Um, so again, this is the big one, the Mahāsakuludāyi Sutra. So Maha, large or great. And then the Buddha's going to he's going to do this thing really quickly, and I'll just explain it right now. So he starts off by calling this person Sakuludāyan, but then he eventually just starts calling him Udayan. And it would seem that the person's name in that way, their kind of first name, as we might say, his first name is Udayan. And Sakula, the root of that is kula. And you might know that word kula because in a lot of Buddhist sutras, they're referring to people as either a kulapati or a kulaputra, a kind of a noble person or a person of good heritage in that way. That is what kula. So this is a variation of that. Sakul Udayan. So it's sort of like the noble one, Udayan. So just want to make that clear that the Buddha is going to switch and it's not two different people. That's the main thing I wanted to make clear. Otherwise, like I just said a moment ago, this sutta might take us 2 weeks. It might take us this Sunday and next. And the reason why that is because this is like it's a Maha Sutra. It's a big one, but it's also sort of like there's sort of two things going on in this teaching. And I kind of want to talk about one thing tonight and then deal with the next thing next Sunday. But let's see how it goes. Um, I'm excited to share this sutra tonight because there's like something in here that I find so interesting. Um, it's kind of an interpretation, so I'll be very honest about that, that I'll let you know when I'm interpreting it versus just sort of explaining what the words mean as I usually do. But let's start to go through it a little bit at a time. Let's kind of get to the setting and then the questions. So again, this is Sutta 77, the Mahāsakuludāyi Sutta. And it goes a little something like this. Thus have I heard, On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Rajgaha, the capital, in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. We've been in the squirrel sanctuary before. But now, on that occasion, a number of well-known Paribbājakas, a number of well-known wanderers, were staying at the Peacock's Sanctuary, which is the Wanderers Park, the Paribbājaka Park. That is, there was Annabahara, there was Varadhara, and the wanderer Sakuludāyi, as well as other well-known wanderers. But then, when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking his bowl and his outer robe, went into Rajgaha to beg for alms food. But then he thought, it's still too early to wander for alms food in Rajgaha. Suppose I went to the wanderer Sakuludāyi in the Peacock Sanctuary, the Wanderer's Park. Before I go any further, because this is part of the interpretation tonight. This phrase, it's kind of a trope. We see it in other teachings, or we see it in other sutras. It's this thing that happens where the Buddha gets up too early to go beg for food. And so instead of that, he goes and sees somebody. And I'm letting you know now again, like this is my interpretation, but there's something to that idea that the Buddha's gonna go beg for food, but says it's too early. Let me go have a conversation with these people. So put a pin in that because I want to come back to it. But then the Blessed One went to the Peacock Sanctuary, the Wanderer's Park. Now, on that occasion, the wanderer Sakuludāyi was seated with a large assembly of wanderers who were making an uproar, loudly and noisily talking many kinds of pointless talk, such as talk of kings and where the world comes from and where the oceans go. This is something that we saw in the sutra last week. It was all the various idle chatter, right? And all of that idle chatter leading to the question whether things are so or not. Then the wanderer Sakuludāyi saw the Blessed One coming in the distance. Seeing him, he quieted his own assembly thus, "Sirs, sirs, be quiet, make no noise. Here comes the recluse Gotama. This venerable one, he likes quiet and commends quiet. Perhaps if he finds our assembly a quiet one, he will think to join us." Then the wanderers became silent. This same exact event is what happened with Ananda last week, where they were all being rowdy, but they saw Ananda and they all quieted down. Then the Blessed One went to the wanderer Sakuludāyi, who then said to him, "Let the Blessed One come, venerable sir. Welcome to the Blessed One. It's long since the Blessed One found an opportunity to come here. Let the Blessed One be seated. This seat is ready." The Blessed One sat down on the seat made ready, and the wanderer Sakuludāyi took a low seat and sat down at one side. When he had done so, the Blessed One asked him, "For what discussion are you sitting together here now, Udāyan? And what was your discussion that I interrupted?" And the exact same thing as last week, where they say, "Oh, venerable sir, let be the discussion for which we are now sitting here together. The Blessed One can hear all about that later. In recent days, though, Blessed One, When recluses and Brahmins of various sects have been gathering together and sitting together in the debating hall, this topic has arisen. So all the wanderers are talking and they say, it is a gain, it's a benefit for the people of Anga and Magadha. It is a great gain for the people of Anga and Magadha that all of these recluses and Brahmins, heads of orders, heads of groups, teachers of groups, well-known and famous founders of sects, regarded as many as saints. It's a benefit that they've come to spend the reigns at Rajgaha. There is this Purna the head of an order, the head of a group, the teacher of a group. And then that repeats that whole thing. Purna has come to Rajgaha for the reigns. There is also Makali Gosala, Ajita Keska Kambalin, this Pakuda Katyachanya, and this Sanjaya Belatihiputta, and this Niganta Nataputta, the head of an order, the head of a group, the teacher of a group, the well-known and famous founder of a sect regarded by many as a saint. He too has come to spend the reigns at Rajgaha. And there is also this recluse Gautama, also the head of an order, the head of a group, the teacher of a group, the well-known and famous founder of a sect regarded by many as a saint. He too has come to spend the reigns at Rajgaha. Now, among these worthy recluses and Brahmins, heads of orders, heads of groups, and so on, regarded by many as saints, who is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples? And how, honoring and respecting him, do they live in dependence upon him? That's the question. Now, some of the people there, some of the wanderers, said this. Oh, this Paribbājakavagga is the head of an order, the head of a group, regarded by many as a saint. Yet he's not honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, nor do his disciples live in dependence upon him, honoring and respecting him. Let me explain. I'll tell you about it, because once Paribbājakavagga was teaching his Dharma to an assembly of several hundred followers. But then a certain disciple of his made a noise thus, saying, "Sirs, don't ask Paribbājakavagga this question." Or somebody else might have said, "He doesn't know that." Or, "We already know that." Or, "Ooh, ask us that question." Or, "We'll answer this for you, sir." So it happened that Paribbājakavagga did not get his way, though he waved his arms and wailed, be quiet, I'm teaching here, right? Make no noise, sirs." They are not asking you, sirs, they're asking us. We'll answer them. Indeed, many of his disciples left him after refuting his doctrine thus. "You don't understand this Dharma. You don't understand this discipline. I understand the Dharma and this discipline. How could you understand this Dharma and discipline? Your way's wrong. My way is right. I'm consistent. You're inconsistent. What should have been said first, you said last. What should have been said last, you said it first. What you had so carefully thought up has been turned upside down. Your doctrine is refuted. You've been proven wrong. Go and learn better. Or disentangle yourself from that if you can." Thus Puranyakashyapya is not honored, not respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, nor do his disciples live in dependence upon him, honoring and respecting him. Indeed, he is scorned by the scorn shown to his Dharma. All right, and then the same idea is about to get repeated for the other wanderers that were mentioned, Mikali Gosala, Ajita Kesakambalan, and all of that. That kind of makes sense right there. What happened? The students just started kind of arguing with each other, talking over each other, not letting the teacher speak, and then eventually fracturing into kind of sects or factions, saying, I understand the better teaching better than you do. No, I do. And so that just kind of shows that all of these students don't have respect for the teacher and they don't live in dependence upon the teacher. Regarding Paranya, Kashapya, that is. Everybody okay with that? Pretty straightforward. And just to finish, and some said this Makali Gosala, same thing, Ajitya Kasa Kambalin, all the way down to Nigantha Putta, he's the head of an order, and so on. But his disciples don't honor him, respect him, revere him, and nor do his disciples live in dependence upon him, honoring and respecting him. Indeed, all of those teachers are scorned by the scorn shown to their Dharma. But then there were others there, and some of them said this. Ooh, this recluse Gautama, he too is the head of an order, head of a group, teacher of a group, well-known and famous founder of a sect, regarded by many as a saint. He, though, he is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples. And his disciples, they do live in dependence upon him, honoring and respecting him. In fact, there was one time where the recluse Gautama was teaching his Dharma to an assembly to several hundred followers, and there a certain disciple cleared his throat. Thereupon, one of his companions in the holy life nudged him with his knee to indicate to him, be quiet, venerable sir, make no noise. The Blessed One, the teacher, is teaching us the Dharma. Yeah. When the recluse Gautama is teaching the Dharma to an assembly of several hundred followers, on that occasion, there's no sound of his disciples coughing or clearing their throats. For then, that large assembly is poised in expectancy. Let us hear the Dharma the Blessed One is about to teach. Just as if there was a man at a crossroads pressing out pure honey, and a large group of people were poised in expectancy to so too. When the recluse Gautama is teaching the Dharma to an assembly of several hundred followers, on that occasion there is no sound of his disciples coughing or clearing their throats. For then, that large assembly is poised in expectancy. Let us hear the Dharma the Blessed One is about to teach. And even those, and this is the best part, by the way, right here. And even those disciples of his who fall out from their companions in the holy life and abandon the training to return to the low common life, even they praise the Master and the Dharma and the Sangha. They blame themselves instead of others, saying, we were unlucky. We have little merit. For although we went forth into the homeless life in such a well-proclaimed Dharma, we were unable to live the perfect and pure holy life for the rest of our lives. Having become monastery attendants or lay followers, They undertake and observe the five precepts. Thus, the recluse Gautama is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, and his disciples live in dependency on him, honoring and respecting him. But Udayan, how many qualities do you see in me because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me, and live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me? All right, so Gautama, the Buddha, was the only one that his students all respect and honor him, and all live in dependence upon him. So that's all kind of clearly established. Everybody okay with that setting? All right, so now the Buddha, and this was all Udayan reporting this, right, by the way, right? So then the Buddha says, okay, yeah, like my disciples do honor and respect me. They do live in dependence upon me. But the Buddha asks Udayan, why do you think that is? So why do you think they respect me? And Udayan says, oh, Venerable Sir, I see five qualities in the Blessed One, because of which his disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate him, and live in dependence upon him, honoring and respecting him. What are those five qualities? First, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One eats very little and commends eating very little. This I see as the first quality of the Blessed One, because of which his disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate him, and live in dependence upon him, honoring and respecting him. Again, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One is content with any kind of robe, and commends contentment with any kind of clothes or any kind of robe. This I see as the second quality of the Blessed One. Again, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One is content with any kind of alms food, and commends contentment with any kind of alms food. This I see as the third quality of the Blessed One. Again, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One is content with any kind of resting place. This I see as the fourth quality of the Blessed One. Again, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One is secluded and commends seclusion. This I see as the fifth quality of the Blessed One. Venerable Sir, these are the five qualities that I see in you, the Blessed One, because of which your disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate you, and live in dependence upon you, honoring and respecting you. This is why I wanted to teach this sutra. This response is amazing. There's so much in here. So the Buddha's hears these five qualities, right? And now the Buddha says, oh, okay. Well, suppose, Udayan, my disciples honored, respected, revered, and venerated me, and lived in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me, with the thought, the recluse Gautama eats very little, and he commends eating very little. But Udayan, there are disciples of mine who live on a cupful, or a half a cupful of food, or just a bilva fruit, or half a bilva fruit's quantity of food, while I sometimes eat the full contents of my alms bowl, sometimes even more. So, Udayan, if my disciples honored and respected me and all of that with the thought the recluse Gautama eats very little and commends eating very little, then those disciples of mine who eat very little, who live on a cupful of food, then they shouldn't honor me. They shouldn't respect and revere me for that quality of eating very little, nor should they live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. another example. So that goes to his first quality, right? But check this out. Suppose, Udayan, that my disciples honored, revered, respected me, and lived in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me, because they think the recluse Gautama is content with any kind of robe and commends contentment with any kind of robe. But Udayan, there are disciples of mine who are refuse rag wearers, wearers of coarse robes. They collect rags from cemeteries, rubbish heaps, and shops, make them into patched robes, and then they wear them. But me? I sometimes wear robes given to me by householders, robes so fine that pumpkin hair is coarse in comparison. So if my disciples honored me and respected me and all of that because they thought, wow, the recluse Gautama is content with any kind of robe and commends contentment with any kind of robe, then those disciples of mine who are refuse rag wearers and wearers of coarse robes, they shouldn't honor me then. They shouldn't respect and revere and venerate me for that quality, nor should they live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. All right, so everybody kind of see what's going on, what the Buddha's saying, right? So he's refusing this, right? He's saying this is not why people honor me, right? Because if that's the only reason why they honor me, you could interpret this the other way where he's saying I should be honoring them if that's the case, because they're eating less than me. They're wearing worse robes than me. Let's read another one. Suppose, Udayan, that my disciples honored and respected me because they thought the recluse Gautama is content with any kind of alms food and commends contentment with any kind of alms food. But Udayan, there are disciples of mine who are alms food eaters, who go on unbroken alms rounds from house to house, who delight in gathering their food. When they've entered among the houses, they will not consent even when invited to sit down. But me? I sometimes eat on invitation meals, meaning not going around wandering, but where they've just invited me over. So I sometimes eat on invitation meals of choice rice and many yummy sauces and curries. So if my disciples honored me with the thought the recluse Gautama is content with any kind of alms food and commends contentment with any kind of alms food, then those disciples who are alms food eaters, like hardcore alms food eaters, they shouldn't honor me, respect, revere, and venerate me for this quality. Nor should they live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. Once again, suppose, Udayan, that my disciples honored and respected me because they thought the recluse Gautama is content with any kind of resting place and commends contentment with any kind of resting place. But there are disciples of mine who are tree root dwellers and open air dwellers, who do not use a roof for 8 months of the year, while I sometimes live in gabled mansions, plastered within and without, protected against the wind, secured with locks, right? Secured with door bolts, with shuttered windows. So if my disciples honored me thinking, wow, the recluse Gautama is content with any kind of resting place, and he commends contentment with any kind of resting place, then those disciples of mine who are tree root dwellers and open air dwellers, they shouldn't honor me, respect, revere, and venerate me, or live in dependence upon me. And then suppose Udayan. Suppose my disciples honored and respected me because they thought the recluse Gautama is secluded and commends seclusion. But there are disciples of mine who are deep forest dwellers, dwellers in remote resting places, who live withdrawn in remote jungle thicket resting places and return to the midst of the Sangha only once each half a month for the recitation of the Pratimoksha rules. But me? I sometimes live surrounded by bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, by men and women lay followers, by kings and by kings' ministers, by other sectarians and their disciples. So if my disciples honored me, thinking, wow, the recluse Gautama is secluded and commends seclusion, then those disciples of mine who are hardcore forest dwellers, they shouldn't honor and respect me. They shouldn't live in dependence upon me. Thus, Udayan, it's not because of these 5 qualities that my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me, and live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. However, Udayan, there are 5 other qualities that, because of those, my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me and live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. Are you poised in expectancy at what the Buddha is about to say? So allow me then to mention my little thing. So before we move into the next part, and we might, at this point, we might do this whole sutra tonight, which is awesome. But I just wanted to remind you, so there's that initial thing about it's too early to go begging for food. So I'm going to go have a conversation with the wanderer. So that's our first mention of food. Then there's the reference to the person at the crossroads giving out the honey, and everybody poised in expectancy of getting the honey. So there we have a food reference, but it's this food reference with the analogy of the Dharma, right? Where the people are waiting for the honey, like the practitioners are waiting for the Dharma. So that's our second food kind of analogy that's specifically tying the Dharma with this honey, right? Then we have the conversation with Udayan. And yeah, there are some of those that are about robes, about resting places, but 2 of those have to do with alms food. And this idea of kind of eating, either eating whatever's in your alms bowl or anything like that. So I just want to show or point out there's all of these references to food that are going on in here. And then the Buddha says this thing, he says, yeah, my disciples don't honor me because of those 5 things. They honor me because of these 5 things. And then I made my joke about, are you poised in expectancy? Because that's how I feel like the sutra is doing it, where it has set you up to want to know, oh, then why do the disciples honor and respect the Buddha, right? So let's go through these. We'll see how far we get. If it seems like, we'll need to go next week, we will to finish this. But number 1, higher virtue. So here, Udayan, my disciples esteem me for higher shila. The word is shila. So we're talking about morality. I would not, virtue is usually punya. It's usually kind of merit. Whereas looking at the Pali, it's like, oh, they're talking about shila. So this is about superior morality. So my disciples esteem me for superior shila morality. This way, the recluse Gautama is virtuous. He possesses the supreme skandha of Shila, of virtue. This is the first quality because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me. And they live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. Pretty straightforward, but I want to make sure that that's straightforward for everybody. So we're talking, yeah, Noam, please.
Why do they call that a skanda?
All of these are actually listed as an aggregation of something.
Oh, it's
And
a
this was
general use of the term skanda. It's not the skanda, it's a skanda.
indeed, and that what Noam, what you're commenting on is a good reminder for kind of us Dharma students that a skandha is an aggregation. And it could be an aggregation of merit or virtue. It could be an aggregation of all kinds of different things. It just so happens that the first aggregate of physical form is an aggregation of earth, water, fire, and air. And sensations are an aggregation of pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain. So those are the five skandhas are aggregations, but this is a helpful reminder that that's just a general term for a coagulation. Yeah. And it's not necessarily bad. It's another important point here. So, and oh, please, Maria, sorry.
Thank you. Just quick question. What exactly do we mean by the higher virtue?
Yep. It's exactly what I was going to talk about for a moment. So, when we're talking about Shila, moral discipline, there's already in a way been a reference to those five precepts, like the big five against killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and intoxication. So that if one was absolutely not violent, totally honest and truthful, never taking what has not been given, completely in control of their sexual energy, and in no way driven towards intoxication. That is the Shila that the Buddha teaches, and it is considered superior Shila in that way. It's considered superior morality. There are a lot of other, like, for example, just to give you a contrast, if you were a Brahmin and you were like a priest in that kind of Brahmanic system, you may refrain from sex for a while, and you may refrain from intoxication for a while in order to get ready to do a ritual because you need to be pure. But then once the ritual's over, you can go back to doing whatever you were doing. Like you just needed to be pure for the ritual. Whereas the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha were like, whoa, he's talking about being pure all the time. Like not just before the ritual or not just before the big event. And so that is considered this sort of like superior morality. And it has to do with the exact teachings against not being violent, not stealing, not lying, and all of that. So, why is the Buddha revered? Because he lives that perfect morality that he talks about. Like he's not just suggesting we live that way. We see that he lives that way. So that's the first reason, first quality of the Buddha. He's an aggregation of morality in that sense. Everybody good with number one? They get progressively more technical or tricky in that way. So number two, knowledge and vision. Again, Udayan. My disciples esteem me for my excellent knowledge and vision this way. When the recluse Gotama says, I know, he truly knows. When he says, I see, he truly sees. The recluse Gotama teaches the Dharma through direct knowledge, not without direct knowledge. He teaches the Dharma with a sound basis, not without a sound basis. He teaches the Dharma in a convincing manner, not in an unconvincing manner. This is the second quality because of which my disciples honor, respect, and live in dependence upon me. So, knowledge and vision, that when the Buddha says, I know, he truly knows. And when he says, I see, he truly sees. The idea here being, of course, that, you know, we've talked about this a lot actually in the past in kind of, we were dealing with some suttas where the Buddha was kind of arguing with the Nigantahas and or even just other sects in that way, but in particular the Nigantahas. And a lot of those teachings they're about if you do practice, then in your next life, like something will happen as a result of that. And so then it's a question of like, well, but how do you know? How do you know that that's going to work? Like, how do I know that what I'm doing now will pay off then? And so the Buddha kind of suggests that that's a kind of very tricky kind of metaphysics or a tricky religion in that sense, because it's like, that's kind of convenient for the teacher to say, don't worry, everything I'm telling you will be proven true in your next life. Whereas the Buddha talks about things that are knowable now. And when he says see, like he's not talking about vision sight in that way exactly, right? But he's talking about that kind of insight might be the kind of better analogy in that way. So the Buddha's knowledge and vision is about things he's actually experienced, actually knows about, and has actually seen, not speculation about what might happen in the future. That's one way to read kind of the knowledge. The second quality of the Buddha's knowledge and vision is true in that sense. Questions about number 2? Cool. Number 3, prajna, or panna in Pali, prajna, it's actually abhipranya, like it's like super pranya in that way. So otherwise translated as higher wisdom. Again, Udayan, my disciples esteem me for the higher wisdom, and they esteem me this way. The recluse Gautama is wise. He possesses the supreme pranyaskandaha, the supreme aggregation of wisdom. It's impossible that he should not foresee the implications of an assertion, or that he should not be able to confute with reasons the current doctrines of others. What do you think, Udayan? Would my disciples, knowing and seeing thus, break in and interrupt me? No, Venerable Sir. I do not expect instruction from my disciples. Invariably, it is my disciples who expect instruction from me. This is the third quality because of which my disciples honor, respect, and live in dependence upon me. So this particular prajna, or abhiprajna, or abhipanna in that way, This sort of definitely seems to be a kind of slightly different prajna than we're used to in Mahayana sutras. This particular wisdom or abhi, and actually that I should have even kind of thought about this sooner. I'm just thinking about it now. But that language of abhi in a Pali sutta, in the Pali context, abhi, it's always sort of pointing to the abhidharma and the abhivinaya. And what I mean is that or I have noticed that in the earlier teachings in the Pali canon, pranya or panna, it's usually kind of much more correlated and related to like logic, reason, argumentation, discussion, proving points. Like it's a very kind of uh, rational, logical type of wisdom. Whereas in the Mahayana tradition that a lot of us are kind of maybe more used to, prajna is like, it's even sometimes translated as intuition. It's this like meta knowledge almost, right? Where you're not even operating in concepts. So the Mahayana idea is a little different than this. We'll notice that the Buddha basically says, that his supreme aggregation of wisdom can kind of refute any argument, is basically what's being said there in that way. And this aggregation of wisdom, which means all the students are looking to the Buddha. The Buddha is not looking to the students for anything in that way. So that's one of the reasons, the third reason, why the Buddha's disciples revere him is this superior wisdom. And then number two, superior knowledge and vision. And number one, superior merit or superior shila. Ready for the fourth quality of the Buddha? Again, Udayan. When my disciples have met with suffering and they become victims of suffering, prey to suffering, they come to me and they ask me about the noble truth of suffering. Being asked, I explain to them the noble truth of suffering, and I satisfy their minds with my explanation. They ask me about the noble truth of the origin of suffering, and I explain it to them and satisfy their minds. They ask me about the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and I explain to them the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and I satisfy their minds with my explanation. And my disciples ask me about the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Being asked, I explain to them the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering, and I satisfy their minds with my explanation. This is the fourth quality because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and live in dependence upon me. I tell it like it is one way of reading that regarding suffering. Any questions about, of course, the classic Four Noble Truths? I probably wouldn't expect any questions about that from this group. Cool. So then that only leads number 5. But number 5, which the translators of this version have called the way to develop wholesome states. That's an interpretation in that way. That's not in the Pali. But I do want you to know that this next section, so the 5th quality of the Buddha, it's going to go on for pages and pages and pages. And this is why I'm not sure if we'll get all the way through this, because there's a lot of information in here that I'd like to discuss. But what I would like you to know is that the translators of this, Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, they've divided this into the respective like sections. So we're going to talk about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the four right efforts, the four bases of spiritual power, the five faculties, the five powers. And this is going to go on. Seven factors of enlightenment, and then the Eightfold Path. I do want to talk about that because there's a lot of good information here about those teachings. But what I want you to know is that within the world of Buddhism, and I used to think that this was something that was only part of the Mahayana tradition, but I have come to realize, and I have learned, oh no, this has always been a part of the Buddhist tradition. And what it is that in the Buddhist tradition, there is something called the 37 Aids to Awakening. And it's a list of lists. We know that the Buddhist tradition loves its lists. And so in the Mahayana tradition, if you're reading like Mahayana sutras, they will often just talk about like a bodhisattva being skillful in the 37 aids to awakening. They don't tell you what those are, but they, just presume you know. Well, these are the 37 aids to awakening. The four foundations of mindfulness, the four right efforts, whatever they are. Yeah, the four right efforts, four bases of spiritual power, five faculties, five powers, seven factors of enlightenment, eightfold path. If you add all that up, that's 37 aids to awakening. This sutra adds a little bit more to the end of this, which gets really wild. But I would suggest, and what I want you to know is that I think the reason why this one is called the Mahāsakuludāyi Sutta, like the big one, it's not because it's longer, even though it is a little longer than the other sutta. I think this one's called the Maha Sutta because it has all the Dharma. And I mean, like, this is an exhaustive list of the teachings in this sutta. So we're not going to go through like all of them word for word. I do kind of want to talk about them though, because I think it's helpful to kind of like think about them all together in that way. So I also want to remind you that the Buddha said there's five qualities I have that it's because of these that my disciples revere me. And we did four of them. And this is the fifth. So again, Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the four foundations of mindfulness. Here, a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as a body, ardent, fully aware, mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. They abide contemplating Vedana, sensations as sensations. They abide contemplating Chitta, or mind states as Chitta. And they abide contemplating Dharmas, mental objects or ideas or concepts, as Dharmas, mental concepts. Ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. And thereby my disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So these are the basis of Buddhist meditation, of course. This is the basis of the practice, the four foundations of mindfulness. We begin any and every meditation practice by first coming into bodily awareness, being aware of the body as a body. And then once you're kind of settled on that bodily awareness, you can kind of, I like to call it kind of just adjusting the focus a little bit and tuning into the sensations of the body, the various, whether it's painful feelings or pleasant feelings, wherever they're coming from, and then tightening the focus a little bit more to the very state of mind that you're in at this moment, but being aware that it's arising from all the sensations you're experiencing from the body. And then finally, tightening that focus even more to awareness of thoughts themselves of that mind state produced by those sensations of the body. So these are the four foundations to get us into a nice, concentrated meditative state. The one aspect of this that I would like to kind of like highlight tonight, it's the phrase, it's so important. So being mindful of the body, right? Body as the body, ardent, fully aware of it, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. Very, very important, this idea that in that moment where you're meditating, you want to bring it in, you want to bring your concentration in. The Buddha is suggesting that we put it down our excitement for the world, our desire for the world, our kind of covetousness for the world, but also put away your grieving for the world. In that way, the world, there's lots to grieve about, but in that moment, just it'll be there to grieve when you're done. So just in that moment, put away the grief and the desire. Focus on the body, sensations, mind states, and then dharmas themselves. Yeah? In order to help you do that, you may then also want to practice the four efforts, the four right efforts, right? And again, Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the four right efforts, or the four right kinds of striving. Here, a practitioner awakens virya, awakens zeal for the non-arising of unarisen, unwholesome states. And they make an effort, arouse energy, and exert their mind, and they strive to keep any, what we would call them today, right, intrusive thoughts, those kinds of, if we don't have them, we make an effort to keep them not around, right? A practitioner also awakens zeal for the abandoning of any unwholesome thoughts or unwholesome states that have already arisen. So if one happens to make its way up, we want to abandon it. We don't want to water it with attention. We want to abandon it in that way. The practitioner awakens zeal for the arising of wholesome states. So those good thoughts, thoughts of compassion and kindness for the world, thoughts of wisdom, those are the good stuff that we want to encourage the arising of. And the practitioner awakens zeal for the continuance, the non-disappearance, for the strengthening and increasing and fulfillment by development of wholesome states that we have managed to arise. And the practitioner makes effort, arouses energy for all of that, and thereby my disciples abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. Yeah? Next up, the four bases of spiritual power. This is called the Riddhi Pada, the Pada, the path of the Riddhis, and that term Riddhi is related to Siddhi, the spiritual superpowers. This is a teaching I don't talk a lot about, although I've actually taught a whole course on it a while ago. It's a very interesting idea. These are basically like we've heard about the siddhis, the spiritual superpowers. Well, these are the four practices basically for bringing about the siddhis, the spiritual powers. And it's complicated, and I won't get too into it, but it's a complicated formula. So the Buddha says here, a practitioner a bhikkhu, develops the basis for spiritual superpower consisting in concentration due to chanda, and determined striving. So the first of the four bases of spiritual power is interestingly chanda, desire. And this is where I always like to remind everybody that in the world of Buddhism, since the beginning, desire is not a problem. Chanda is not a problem. What could be a problem is what you desire. The desire is not a problem. This is kind of I think, a gross misunderstanding of Buddhism. We talk in Buddhism about bodhicanda, the desire for awakening. And you need to have a desire for awakening in order to be awakened. You actually will never get awakened if you don't want to be. So you have to have chanda, but for the right things in that way. So the first basis of developing spiritual powers is a kind of desire in that way. And then that desire is concentrated. So there's a concentration due to desire, or chanda, what they're calling zeal, and then a determined striving. And then that leads to the development of the second basis of spiritual power, which consists in concentration of virya, what they're calling energy, but it's virya, the drive, the determination. And then they develop the basis of spiritual power consisting in concentration due to purity of chitta. There's that chitta word again, number 3. Oh, it's the same as in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Interesting. So it's still working on that state of mind, but it's a concentrated chitta. And then finally, from your desire for the development of spiritual superpowers, for you're putting forth the effort to attain spiritual superpowers, and you're concentrating of the mind on attaining such spiritual superpowers, in such a concentrated state, you then develop concentration due to what's called mimamsa, investigating dharmas through determined striving. And those are the 4 magical ingredients to the riddhipada for the development of the spiritual superpowers. Questions about any of that so far? The riddhipada is very interesting, by the way. It's sort of, again, one of those things we don't talk a lot about, but then the Buddha says, Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 5 spiritual faculties. So these are indriyas. And I want to remind you that an indriya, a faculty, well, there's faculties like being able to see, being able to hear, being able to smell, being able to taste, being able to feel things through the tactile body, and being able to think. Those are all faculties. So they're kind of like abilities, right? But these are the 5 spiritual faculties. Here, a practitioner develops the faculty of shraddha, the faculty of faith, which leads to peace, leads to enlightenment. They develop the faculty of virya. There it is another time. So virya, determination, is an essential part of the path. They develop the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of samadhi, concentration, and the faculty of prajna or panna, wisdom. So these are 5 faculties or kind of abilities, but they're spiritual abilities. Let's just think for a moment, really quickly. Let's just do one. I want to quickly talk about the faculty of mindfulness. So let's remember that sati or smrti is that ability to hold your focus or your concentration at will for as long as you want. So you're mindful, boom, focus, whether it's the breath or whatever it is. But that is an ability. Not everybody can actually muster the strength to focus their attention for 45 minutes on a candle flame, unmoving. That's an ability, it's a faculty, it's a spiritual faculty, and it needs to be cultivated or developed just like any other faculty. Because I've used this example in the past, you may have hands and you may be able to sort of play the keys of a piano, like you have the ability or the faculty of doing that, but you can't just sit down and play Liszt or play Beethoven or whoever. It requires cultivating the faculty that you have. Well, you have a spiritual faculty. In fact, you have 5 spiritual faculties, and they can either be just sort of like wasting away because you're not cultivating them, or you can begin to work on them and eventually be playing the kind of the Beethoven of meditative enlightenment in that way. But it's not going to happen the first time you sit down to focus your mindfulness on an object. Another interesting one is, of course, faith. This idea of shraddha, that you can have faith, but it's a faculty that you need to cultivate. So I think it's helpful to kind of think about those in that way as like abilities that you already have, but you might not have cultivated them yet in that way. And then those, by the way, the 5 faculties, if you were to develop them in the way that I just talked about, well, then you could acquire the 5 powers. Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 5 powers. Here, a practitioner develops the power of Shraddha faith, the power of Virya energy, the power of mindfulness, the power of Samadhi concentration, and the power of wisdom, which leads to peace, to nirvana. So notice that if you cultivate those faculties, they can become basically superpowers in that way. Interesting to notice, but just kind of making a relationship between those two. Next up in the list of the 37 factors is the 7 factors of enlightenment. So Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 7 factors or limbs, anga, of buddhi, of awakening. So these are the sapt bodhyanga, the 7 bodhi angas, or the limbs, the angas of buddhi. Here, a practitioner, a bhikkhu, develops the mindfulness enlightenment factor, which is supported by seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, and results in relinquishment. The practitioner develops the investigation of dharmas, factor of enlightenment, the virya, there it is one more time, the virya factor of enlightenment, so determination or energy, the priti, priti, rapture factor of enlightenment, the tranquility factor of enlightenment, the samadhi concentration factor of enlightenment, and then ultimately the upeksha or equanimity factor of enlightenment, all of which, by the way, are supported by seclusion, supported by dispassion, and supported by cessation, and result in relinquishment. So those are the 7 aspects to becoming awakened. Buddhi, right? There's those 5 powers that will help us do that. We develop those 5 powers by cultivating those 5 faculties. All of that is aided by those 4 Riddhipada, the path of the 4 powers in that way. And then, of course, the idea is that the 4 right efforts and the 4 foundations of mindfulness are the basis of all of this. So I'm trying to tie this all together for you so that you're kind of not confused of like, why is Virya on all of these lists? I don't want you to be thinking of them as like separate lists. It's all moving towards enlightenment. And there's aspects to that. Mindfulness, concentration, faith, right? All of these things are moving us towards that. And then the Buddha just has all of these interesting upaya, these interesting lists to help us understand how they all fit together. So everybody okay with the first? No.
Sorry, this is a picky question, but okay, so Virya is on at least 3 of the lists. And I understand what you're saying. I mean, I came to peace with this a long time ago, that there are lists within lists and they overlap. But if Virya really means the same thing in every list, then there really aren't 37 things, because some of them are counted 3 times. But really, my real question is, does it really mean the same thing in every list, or does it have like a subtle difference in meaning depending on which list it's in?
Excellent. Great question. The way I understand it, like let's stick with Virya, and that's a really easy one. So for example, the 4 bases of the spiritual powers, that is not the 4 bases of Bodhi awakening. That is not the 4 bases of a bunch of other possible things. It's the 4 bases for developing the siddhis. If you want to develop siddhis in that way, you have to put forth the effort to do that. Now, it's in the factors of awakening, because if you want to achieve awakening, virya is a necessary quality, and so on. So it does mean the same, because it's about you have to put forth effort, but it's on the list differently because it's about achieving that particular state or what have you.
So it could almost be like Virya for awakening or Virya for spiritual powers.
Excellent. Or mindfulness and concentration for superpowers versus mindfulness and concentration for awakening. And it's not that it's a different practice, but it's part of a different rubric or a different structure. Excellent question, though, Noam.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And let's finish off the official list of the 37. And that's going to be the very last of them, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. So that's what they're calling section 7, paragraph 21. Again, Udayan. I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. Here, a practitioner develops right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And thereby my disciples of mine abide, and thereby many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. Eightfold Path. What can I say? Eightfold Path, of course, leading to the cessation of suffering. I do want to kind of point out that difference between Buddhi, awakening, And let's remember that buddhi is the root of being a buddha. So a buddha has achieved buddhi. The Eightfold Path, though, is about the cessation of suffering. That's about nirodha. And the cessation of suffering, nirodha, that's nirvana. Nirvana is the Eightfold Path, cessation of suffering. And I just want you to notice that that is not the development of the spiritual superpowers, not the awakening. It's its own thing in that way. It's a part of the whole path of Buddhism, but that is just one part of it in that way. Once again, we have a lot of overlap in terms of mindfulness is on there, concentration is on there. Right effort actually refers to the 4 right efforts that we went through. So if you've ever wondered that about, like, in the Eightfold Path, what does right effort mean? It means the 4 right efforts in that way. Any questions about the Eightfold Path? Any of the particular steps for some reason not clear to anybody? Noe, please.
I'm just, you said, so this message that I got however long ago, that there's suffering, there's the origins of suffering, there's the cessation of suffering, there's this Eightfold Path, and that toolkit, that path, that direction that the Buddha gave me, it's enough for me. It's enough. So something that you said, it's like this is just one part of it. I think it's all of it.
Mhm.
I just have to say, because when I get into my mindful thinking and spinning off of this, it becomes effort.
Mhm.
There is good effort. I understand all of this is a wonderful sutra. Thank you so much for the translation. Most excellent. But I think that I always I go to these talks and they're just way out there.
Mm.
But in a different center.
That
And
shall remain nameless, yes.
it'll remain nameless. Uh, and I'm like, but come back to this. And I'm
Mm.
always coming back to this, coming back to the Four Noble Truths.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate this. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited about listening to this again.
Nice.
But it sounded to me just so if you could clarify that the eightfold the first Four Noble Truths are just an aspect, or is it the foundation, or is it a direction?
So, yeah. So very, very interesting. So it's interesting because even in this sutra, the Buddha has already presented the Four Noble Truths as, what was that? That was the 4th quality, right? That the Buddha has, which is that he tells it like it is. But actually, Noe, there was a comment I wanted to make, and your question jogged my memory. So I'm going to jump, and this is relevant to the Eightfold Path section that we're on. But I want to jump back to the Four Noble Truths section on page 636, paragraph 14, where he says, Udayan, when my disciples have met with suffering and become victims of suffering, prey to suffering, they come to me and they ask me about suffering, right? Or they ask me about the noble truth of suffering. And then being asked, I explain to them the noble truth of suffering, right? Being asked, I explain to them the noble eightfold path, the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And I satisfy their minds with my explanation. So, first of all, I love that section for this idea that the Buddha's not going around telling everybody, life is suffering, everything is suffering. It's that when people experience suffering and they come to the Buddha like, oh my God, this has happened to me. The Buddha's like, well, that's the nature of life, actually, is suffering. And it's being caused by this kind of clinging attachment. And if you didn't do that, you wouldn't suffer. And there's a way to not do that. It's called the Eightfold. So the Buddha sort of, what my point is, Noe, is that the Four Noble Truths and understanding them is an aspect of wisdom. Knowing that this is suffering is about knowing, is about wisdom. Knowing what's causing it, woo, that's wisdom. Knowing the cessation of suffering, yeah, that's wisdom. And then the Noble Eightfold Path is wisdom in that way. My point is that the Four Noble Truths as a teaching is sort of an insight, vipassana, wisdom thing. The Eightfold Path, which is the fourth noble truth, but the Eightfold Path is the practice of how do I achieve that? Like, I know what you're talking about, Buddha. Like, I get it now. This does suck. I don't want it to suck. I understand what's making it suck. How do I unsuck the situation? Noble Eightfold Path. And then Noe, I wanted to say something else. I hear you on the kind of the kiss, right? Keep it simple, right? Just it's simple. And on that note, Noe, regarding just the Noble Eightfold Path, my feeling is any one of those correctly done, the others are taken care of. Like if you really look, like if you really, really had the right view, you would already have right action, right speech, all of these other things, if you really had the right view. Or if you were really, really proper about your bodily action, like right action all the way, there's a way in which everything else would just be obvious. So I would even simplify it even more in that sense to say, and I guess what I'm getting across, Noe, is that there is a very beautiful interconnectedness of all these teachings where there really is like an Indra's net of the Dharma, where any one of these teachings is actually all the teachings. It's a beautiful system, in my opinion. It's why I love teaching it. So unless there's any other questions, comments, or ideas, I do think I want to pause there because the rest of this sutra is actually, it it gets into things that we don't actually have any opportunity to talk about on Dharma Doors because, well, let me just give you a little sneak preview for next week. One of the main topics in the section that's coming up is something called a kashina. A kashina is, well, it's tricky, but it's basically like a particular type of meditative object. And this sutra is one of the few sutras to talk about kashinas and to talk about various I guess what I'm getting at is that we don't actually often get explicit meditative instructions in sutras. If you study Buddhism, the real specific instructions, like using a kashina, those are in the commentary. That's in like Buddhaghosa, Visuddhimagga, like all the commentarial stuff that gets into like these more techniques and real specific technical practices. So I'm really excited to read the rest of this sutra where the Buddha gets into this in a sutra. So I don't want to rush that. And like I said, the Noble Eightfold Path actually concludes that 37 Aids to Awakening section. So then we'll read the rest, which actually has to do with meditation, deep meditation. So we're going to save the rest of the sutras. We're going to talk jhanas. We're going to talk about creating a mind-made body and moving your consciousness into a mind-made body. So we're going to have fun next week. But I do want to kind of conclude my like interpretive Dharma talk here about the food. So the Buddha goes on for many more pages, right? And then basically the sutra base ends with, that's what the Blessed One said. And the wanderer Udayin was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Now, this is something that you kind of would have to like, well, again, warning, this is just a kind of like out there Michael interpretation. So I'm not getting this from anywhere but my own experience. But if you've read, in particular, if you've read the Vimalakirti Sutra, so yes, a Mahayana Sutra, but that particular sutra is revealing. If you've read that sutra, you'll know that there's like a whole kind of little discourse going on in that sutra about what would be called a Dharma feast. And the way that I understand this sutra, and again, this is just what came across to me, is that the Buddha, it being too early to go beg for food, goes to see the wanderers. So nobody has eaten yet, right? It's too early. Nobody's eaten yet. And then this last number 5 section, it is a Dharma feast. And I believe that that is sort of like a very interesting through line to this sutra that begins at the very beginning with the Buddha saying it's too early to go beg for food. Then we get that honey analogy. Then we get the commentary about the Buddha eating whatever. And then we get this Dharma download that for me can only be interpreted as a feast. And the Buddha is just giving the wanderers a Dharma feast in the morning. That's how I understand this sutra. So I appreciate you, as always, I appreciate you entertaining my silly Dharma theories. But so that's it for me on this. But again, we're gonna do the end of this sutra next week. So we're gonna keep going on that. Any comments, questions, ideas, inquiries? All right, then. That's gonna, well, again, that won't do it on the sutra, but it'll do it for tonight's Dharma Doors. So